Amorim's tactics and team selection perfectly exposed a problem within Slot's system. His biggest problem, in my opinion. I'll be breaking down how this tactic caused panic within Liverpool's defence, why Man United played their most direct game of the season, and I'm going to tell you the actual truth that you've not heard anywhere else about Man United's goals. So how did Man United win at Anfield for the first time in 9 years? And what exactly did Amorim change? Well, to understand this, we need to begin by looking at how he set up the team. Let's start off with the lineups themselves. So first off, you've got the two teams here, and the massive decision that was made here was that Šeško didn't play. And if Šeško had played, Mount would have played over on that side, and Bumo would have probably got a little bit close to him. They would have targeted Šeško, played it up to him, and Bumo goes and works from there. That's not what they did. They tried something very different, and it worked absolutely fantastically. So if we move it along, you'll see what they were trying to do. By playing Cunha up front, you had someone who would not be that out-and-out target man, who would battle a little bit, but ultimately could drop deep and help, but then move the ball over to this right-hand side. And this was the big battle throughout, and this was the awkwardness that occurred throughout the game. It was this right here. It was this battle between Van Dijk, JaackMaate, Diallo and Mbeumo. Now, Mbeumo was the key part of this because his positioning was constantly between Virgil van Dijk and Kerkez. And what that led to was Kerkez not really knowing who to go to. So the 3-4-3, if we want to call it that today, that Man United deployed here, by having someone like Diallo in there, Kerkez was nervous to go towards him, but nervous not, keeping an eye on Mbeumo to make sure that Van Dijk was safe as well. And that was something that Amorim played on throughout, and it paid dividends really, really early on. We'll come back to this battle between these two because there's some absolutely fascinating different elements to the joy that they got throughout the game, or certainly in that first half, in this half of the pitch, and in particular this channel and that battle between Van Dijk, Mbeumo, Kerkez and Diallo. And the goal was fascinating. Yes, it came a couple of minutes in, but it showcased all the elements that Amorim wanted to employ and the crucial decision to not play Šeško. Now, what's amazing is when you look at the two different angles, I'm going to show you two different angles of this goal. And from one angle, it looks like Van Dijk is saying one thing. From the other angle, you see Konaté's perspective of it, and you think that he sees something different. But what matters here, and yep, you need a little bit of luck at times as a manager, but I'll show you how Amorim exploited this weakness of Kerkez. But if he doesn't pick the team that he picks, it doesn't leave Šeško out and play Mbeumo, who was really good from a physical point of view in terms of being an outlet and just kind of making life difficult so that first ball wasn't an easy one. And you had the players in certain areas of the pitch. I'm talking Diallo and I'm talking Matheus Cunha in all of this, who is here, by the way. Then this goal doesn't happen because it's the most tiny little things that make the difference at the top level. And yes, the root of it was Amorim, but there's a lot at play here. So as you remember, Van Dijk goes up. He kind of takes out McAllister. Should the ref have stopped the game? I don't know, to be honest, at this stage. But the game carried on. And what's interesting here is Matheus Cunha. His positioning is going to be really, really important. But again, if you had Šeško here, that wouldn't have happened. And Mbeumo would have been here. Diallo might have been out here wider. And that would have been Šeško kind of working for that header. Maybe not winning it because Van Dijk's just so good. And as we move it along, you'll see a couple of things here. First of all, what's really important here, because of that lineup, is that Diallo can be that little bit higher up the pitch. And that's really crucial because it leaves a space there, which they do exploit due to the injury of McAllister. And Mbeumo gets up straight away. But Mbeumo gives Diallo this space and he ends up getting the ball, Diallo. We'll come back to that. What's crucial here is the communication between Van Dijk and Konaté, which goes wrong, but no one actually does anything wrong. Let me explain. So Van Dijk goes for that header. And Van Dijk, in that moment, doesn't really look at what's going on. The only person he knows that he's challenged is Mbeumo. And as we move it on, you'll see. He then turns. The only person he's really aware of here is Mbeumo. And so as he carries on, he doesn't scan. And when he looks and points here, this is crucial, absolutely crucial. When he points here, he is saying to Konaté, Mark Mbeumo, because he has not scanned. He's not looked at this point. So he's worried about Mbeumo. And you'll see the reason for this in just a second. As it carries on, he's now making his way back. He thinks Konaté has got Mbeumo. He thinks everything's sweet. Diallo's got the ball here, which, as I say, is really important in terms of Amorim's decision making when it comes to the lineups here, because he's able to have that sort of bit of separation, which leads to that channel, which was a problem throughout the game. And Mbeumo is able to get a yard, and Van Dijk will be disappointed because he's been very clear in pointing and saying, make sure you mark Mbeumo. And he doesn't get there, as we know. He gets his shot off, he scores the goal. And that yard, it means everything. But let's now see it from the other angle. So again, Van Dijk has gone for that header. He sees Mbeumo. Konaté is looking and seeing what's going on here, okay? But who's crucial in all this? Matheus Cunha. If it was Šeško, they'd all be a lot more compact, and this wouldn't be happening. Mbeumo, brave, makes that challenge, gets up straight away. Van Dijk continues to try and press in this instance here, and he, as we say, he's not seen Matheus Cunha. So you can see, he makes that action, turns. The only person he's aware of is Mbeumo. He carries on a few seconds later. He's now making that run. And he can see from the body weight of Mbeumo, this push here is absolutely crucial. Because Van Dijk, using his kind of peripheral vision, which we know he does a lot, he can see that push off. So what he knows is that Mbeumo's coming back this side of him. And because he's seen that movement, he points and says, make sure you're marking Mbeumo. But here's the problem. Konaté doesn't think he's pointing at Mbeumo. He thinks he's pointing at Matheus Cunha. So Van Dijk is telling Konaté to stop Mbeumo and track his run. But actually Konaté is seeing that Cunha is making his run. He thinks he's pointing and saying, make sure you keep an eye on Matheus Cunha. And as you move it along, what you see is this little moment here. It's so tiny, but it's so effective. Because Konaté is worried about Cunha, and Cunha is very upright, that's because he's slowed down for just a second instead of just driving into that space. Because he's seen that Mbeumo is actually the one driving into that space. So although Van Dijk thinks he's passed him on, Konaté, who initially is sprinting as hard as he can, starts to just slow up just a little bit because he thinks his man is Matheus Cunha. He thinks Van Dijk is dealing with Mbeumo. He's not. And so that split second of a yard, instead of going full burst, it changes his body weight, it changes the pace of which he can move, and they have that yard. That is why that goal happens. It's such a tiny thing, but you can only bookend this moment with the positioning of the players. And the positioning of the players all comes from Amorim seeing the biggest problem that Liverpool have, which is Kerkez, Van Dijk and Gakpo at this moment in time when they are out of possession.
My tactics board is now yours to use. Build lineups, create tactics and analyse games with hundreds of teams. Perfect for coaches, content creators, FPL heads, journalists and just bloody good football people. Sign up for free and upgrade anytime to the advanced plan. Links in the description.
So the lineup for Amorim paid dividends right away. But what about his tactics? I thought they were absolutely spot on. And I've watched this game twice now. And constantly they were able to exploit Liverpool's biggest weakness. And one part of that tactical plan was long balls. There were so many long balls. Check this out. This is Lamens' pass map from the game. And what you can see is a couple of things. It's very clear that he played a lot of long balls in this game. And actually, Man United in total played 75 long balls during this game. They only had 200 accurate passes. But there was a real reason behind it. As you can see, on that left-hand side, there was a lot more success than on the right-hand side. But there were a lot more passes over to the left-hand side as well. And you saw it from the very first goal kick. This desire to move everybody over to that left-hand side to then be able to switch. And so when we're talking about the biggest weakness that Liverpool have right now, like they had a lot of XG. They had great chances. Gakpo hit the post several times. So they were able to get at Man United a lot of the time. But Amorim was playing against 10 men. In his mind, he was focusing on 10 men. Let me explain what I mean. Because this battle here between Mbeumo and Kerkez, in possession and out of possession, it was something that he looked to exploit. And what he did out of possession was he put Mbeumo and tucked him in here and allowed that pass to Kerkez at all times. That simple pass. Gravenberch had the ball all the time. So it gave a bit of a battle between temptation for Bruno Fernandes to allow this back line to stay behind the ball. If you see the passing map from Virgil van Dijk, Gravenberch's pretty much on his toes here, and that's because he was able to kind of drop and get the ball, but they made sure there were no gaps in between and no ability to pass the ball into the likes of McAllister or Isak or Szoboszlai. But the one player they were able to pass to whenever they wanted was Kerkez. And the reason for that is this. Check this out. This is every key pass that Kerkez has played. That includes the game against Man United where he had one key pass. You can see from his pass map that he plays the ball very safe. He plays it to Gakpo, or he chucks some crosses in, which generally teams are able to deal with. He is not an effective player on the ball in those areas that he generally is in. When he's in these areas and he's got the ball, Man United generally felt safe. The one moment when he was effective in the game was this. So generally the game plan was to allow Gravenberch to have the ball kind of where he wanted to, but to have that solid bank a little bit deeper down the pitch. But those few moments, and there was probably only one really, where Gravenberch was able to drive past Fernandes, who sort of jumped in at him. And then after that, Kerkez from that narrow position was already a little bit high, but was able to make that driving run, which dragged players back. And Burma was kind of out of it already. They were able to play that pass across. He could make that underlapping run, and he was given the ball, crucially, and actually got a corner from it. But aside from that, Kerkez generally lived here, and Burmo generally lived there, and they were pretty solid in how they set up, and it allowed him to have the ball. Not only allowed Kerkez to have the ball, but actually Kerkez was the pressing trigger. And it's interesting because it's something I've been thinking about quite a lot recently, because I feel like Van Dijk is hesitant to pass the ball to Kerkez at times. But in fact, what I'm starting to realise is that he's the pressing trigger. So Van Dijk is careful in terms of when he passes the ball to him. And you can see that from the positioning of Mbeumo throughout the game. Here, he's actually curved his run a little bit just to ensure that Van Dijk can't get on the ball, but that pass into Kerkez would have been utterly available. And you can see at the bottom hand corner here, Diallo ready to go. And actually, Mamardashvili spots this really, really well, and they actually nearly get themselves in trouble here with Gakpo kind of getting through with one ball over the top. But he was consistently the pressing trigger throughout. And Burmo just in this really clever area in between. And this is from a goal kick early on in the game. You could see that they would have them on this side, and then from there, they would look to work over to this right-hand side and attack this space, and ultimately a bit of an overload between Diallo, Mbeumo, and Kerkez. So this was the only moment when Gravenberch gets the ball, does a little bounce pass, he's able to get past Bruno Fernandes, and you can see Kerkez from that narrow position. This is why he's in this narrow position, to offer that moment if they're able to get in behind that line. And what he does is he drives, he goes. You can see that passing lane is there, and Kerkez is taking players away, and Burmo's struggling a little bit. Diallo's trying to get there, and it leaves that space for Kerkez. But Liverpool don't utilise that enough, and also De Ligt's kind of ready for it, comes across, and they do get a corner from it. But that was probably the only time Kerkez was effective from an offensive point of view. Now, Burmo deserves great credit, as does Amorim, for the general setup of the team. But you can see from his lines here, it's really, really nice because he's completely in line with McAllister, kind of stopping that pass there. Casemiro can see it as well, so he can stop that pass from Gravenberch. He's keeping an eye on Van Dijk, so he can kind of press somewhat towards him if he wants to. But also, Kerkez, that ball is available. Play that ball to him. You're absolutely fine. And in fact, he becomes that pressing trigger. You can see here, as soon as there's any kind of backwards pass, because Kerkez is just going to play that safe pass instead of, say, wrapping into McAllister or driving himself, Burmo's ready to go. And he presses. And it wasn't just him. It was actually De Ligt as well. This is a moment where Kerkez in that narrow position, Konate passes the ball to him. De Ligt, who very rarely jumped in this game, was happy to because it was Kerkez. That was the weakness that they wanted to get at. And it's something I've been thinking about with Virgil van Dijk, because he has been a bit hesitant in passing the ball to Kerkez. But I actually think maybe the truth in all of that is not that he's not having Kerkez. I think it's more that what is Kerkez offering from an attacking point of view with the ball, but also he probably is aware that opposition teams are now making Kerkez the pressing trigger. And in this instance, he actually loses the ball. So long balls all the time, but often over to this left-hand side. But the difficulty for Liverpool came from the positioning of Mbeumo, and that leading to Van Dijk moving, and there being these big gaps in between. And it wasn't just Mbeumo doing it. It was Diallo making life difficult for him as well. Kerkez often in that rest defence position being a bit higher and a bit more narrow, so that leads to that space in behind as well. And that's something that Amorim wanted to exploit, both kind of in behind initially, but also just in this channel here by Diallo kind of retaining that width and then that channel being available because they've gone long and they've got a lot of players here. But the crucial thing was winning those second balls. And they did that really, really well in the first half. And there were warning signs, but then very quickly they made life difficult for them down that channel. Now, initially here you can see straight away, actually, you've got Diallo and Kerkez pretty far away from Van Dijk and Mbeumo here. These two far closer together, and that gap between the two was a problem throughout the game. In this instance, the ball goes long from Lamens, one of pretty much every ball. I think he played one short pass in the entirety of the game. The ball drops, and it drops to Cunha. Again, back to those lineups here, not standing on the centre-backs. They're not marking anyone. That makes life difficult, but it's also Van Dijk's obviously concerned. Now, Kerkez is concerned about Mbeumo in behind, and they're not in a nice line. These three are, but Kerkez isn't. And he was caught between the two throughout. So this was a bit of a warning shot, I think, initially, where actually the opportunity doesn't arrive because McAllister's in a solid position. They play the ball over to Diallo here. Kerkez is in kind of no man's land, not really getting there. And Van Dijk's getting pulled out into areas that he doesn't really want to be in. Not much comes from this, but you can see how well drilled they were because Diallo straight away plays it back and De Ligt knows that he's going to play that ball into that channel for Mbeumo. And this back line of Liverpool is starting to get stretched. It's starting to make life a little bit difficult for them. But also, who's there ready to help him? Person who played the pass over here initially, Matheus Cunha. Again, something that Seško just wouldn't naturally do. But by having Matheus Cunha there, you were able to often overload this right-hand side. They did it throughout and they got pretty much all of their big chances from exactly that. In this instance, it actually drops to him, all about those second balls, right? But Van Dijk's able to clean up and get rid of it. And in that, it didn't work out for them, and the game's done. But what was really, really important here was the positioning of Diallo, because I thought Diallo was absolutely sensational in this, and not just kind of initially having the right body language to be attacking and trying to double up on Kerkez, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, but also when they play those long balls, if you see that you're not going to win it, Konate is clearly going to win this one, he's going to head it back, you need to get back to stop Gakpo. And Diallo, he worked really, really hard. It's a good thing to keep an eye out. It's like when you haven't got the ball, who's moving? And that's something that I thought he did brilliantly in this game. But he was a threat in both instances. This is when it came to fruition. Another big call that Amorim made, Diallo playing as a left wing back as opposed to a right wing back. And the reason for it is because it allows Cunha to kind of come in and Diallo will naturally play inside instead of playing outside. And that leads to what? It leads to the ability to move the ball over to this side. And you saw it again, the positioning of Mbeumo. Really, really awkward kind of throughout. On this occasion, Kerkez, you can see he's keeping an eye on him. And actually, someone else to keep an eye on is Gakpo. Because Gakpo needs to keep an eye on Bruno Fernandes. Cunha drives with the ball and then plays a pass. And what's great here, it's kind of the movement of Mbeumo. It drags Kerkez with him. And then from there, it's just a lovely pass to, that's right, Diallo. He's looking alive. He's up there. He's ready. And now there's that distance between them. If he wants to play that first pass, he could have, but he didn't want to. He wanted to have a little go at Kerkez, but there's that separation to allow him to get one-on-one. He actually kind of beats his man, gets the ball in, and actually the movement from Mbeumo is really lovely as well because he actually ends up going to this side of him before coming the other side. You're in the blind spot of Virgil van Dijk. It makes life difficult, and it also makes it life difficult for Van Dijk to come over and help Kerkez. So Kerkez all of a sudden is in a one-on-one with Diallo. And we were talking about Gakpo earlier on. Something that you can't see on these cameras, but I've seen it with my own eyes, and you kind of see it in the first moment there. Gakpo does not track his run. Bruno Fernandes is there, and Bruno Fernandes, as we know, should score from this. You wouldn't expect it. But that all comes from the setup, the team, and the work rate. Diallo kind of looking alive, but Gakpo not coming back and tracking his man. And that is a bit of a problem because it's the whole left side. Kerkez feels like he's got to go and jump because he's got to get there. Van Dijk's getting dragged out and he doesn't like that either. And Gakpo, I think, is going through the motions a lot of the time, especially when it's these long balls. You've got to be switched on. It's not that complicated, but you've got to be ready for it. Second balls, Van Dijk winning it. Another thing that I think Mbeumo deserves huge praise for is the fact that he was a physical threat with Van Dijk. Yes, Van Dijk's going to win the ball, but what happens when the ball drops? Have you got players around? Yes, Kerkez. Yes, Fernandes. Yes, Diallo. All looking alive. And Kerkez, understandably, needs to cover in just in case he doesn't win it. And to be honest, he probably doesn't need to because Van Dijk's so imperious in the air. But it's great play from Man United in terms of being ready. Like, it's pretty pragmatic stuff. But what's really interesting here shows that they were ready for those second balls is this. De Ligt is much higher than he normally would be. And that's because he knows Van Dijk is going to win that header and he wants to be ready to play that pass. Gakpo just kind of looking, going through the motions, not really looking alive to it or helping out the team. Kerkez not tight because he's covering in behind for Fernandes, as is Konate. And now Diallo's got the ball. Now you can hurt them. And they did. They get the ball, Mbeumo, from that more half-space position. He's able to drive into that area. Kerkez is a couple of yards off it. He's got that area to go into. Diallo knows exactly what he's doing, and Burmo knows exactly what he's doing, but it doesn't stop there. Cunha, if we go back one, you can see Cunha here just staying off it a little bit. I thought he did it really, really well and timed his runs fantastically. He comes to get involved. They know that this is the area and they know there's channels to be exploited here. And they do exactly that. Cunha now making that run for Mbeumo, that third man run as Diallo's making his way. Fernandes is making his way. Gakpo's kind of behind it all. I know I'm being a bit harsh on him there, but maybe it's just because of the last one. Cunha in that area. Again, they're so difficult. And Kerkez is come inside now. And it could have been a goal. It should have been a goal. It was so nearly a goal on a few different occasions, actually. Just great play from Man United down that right-hand side. And Liverpool didn't really have an answer for it. And this is literally just seconds later. So you can see 26-25, 26-03. This is a couple of seconds later. They've actually had a couple of chances in between this, actually, Man United. The ball goes, the ball breaks. And this is the difficulty with the kind of the rest defence position of Kerkez at times. Something that Amorim clearly exploited is that you've got a lot of players here getting in and around it, trying to stop them. And Gakpo actually drives inside, plays like a hospital ball to McAllister, who's had enough difficulty and pain already. Casemiro is able to win the ball, and when they win the ball, where's Kerkez? He's not in a great position. He's kind of in no man's land because he thought Liverpool were going to retain possession in this instance. He's narrow, and he's not close enough to Bruno Fernandes to really make an impact, but as we know, there's going to be people there ready to hurt them. And at this time, you've got Cunha making life difficult. And what he does brilliantly is he sort of stands up. He stands up and it looks like he's not going to make that move, but it's a lovely little double movement before then making that channel run there. You've got Diallo making that run on this side of him. Kerkez, does he go here? Does he follow his man? If he follows his man, he's going to leave a big old gap there. He follows his man. And fortunately, you've got someone as good as Virgil van Dijk who reads the play after that initial movement, and it's really lovely. Cunha comes this way, then goes. And Van Dijk just gets the littlest of touches on it. Kerkez then has to make a last-ditch challenge, but otherwise, Cunha would have been in. So throughout this first half, Man United were having so much joy overloading that right-hand side. And when they were able to get the ball and settle it down just a little bit, they were able to play these kind of little nearest person passes, keep the ball for a little bit, because we know, and that's why Cunha wasn't coming to get involved, we know that the ball is going to work its way back over to this other side. And that's exactly what happens. And another great chance kind of nearly comes from it. And this is a great, real sort of signifier of it for me, because it's one where with all this space here, if Dorgu's playing, he turns out and plays it. But he goes straight back in because there's that overload here. Now, Konate's gone and pressed him here. Look at the poor defensive play from Liverpool. But they think they're okay. There's like a touch of, I don't want to say hubris, but it was just really clever play. It's a drilled in pass to Cunha, who chests it to Mbeumo, who's already out wide. Kerkez has now got two players. Konate's been pressing and now wants to get back in position, but doesn't look alive to the situation. Doesn't just fill in back in this area here. He starts to make his way back to his normal position. And as you can see, a gigantic big area is available for Man United to get into. And because they just weren't really at it, to be honest, Bruno Fernandes saying keep calm. Cunha wants to kind of get on the ball, but Bruno Fernandes knows what's about to happen. He's going to play it and he's going to pop that pass into it, because Gakpo is just kind of following the ball. Kerkez is pointing, hoping that Van Dijk will come over and help him because he's got to deal with Mbeumo. And Konate has just decided to not defend and make his way back over to his normal position. And that leaves a massive space that should have been exploited more than it was, really. Great little pass from Bruno Fernandes. Casemiro kind of staying out of it and just like sitting on the toes of his centre-backs throughout the game here. And again, that right channel in between Kerkez and Van Dijk, it was a problem throughout the game. And if Cunha's touch is a little bit better, then he's actually driving this way, and then they're in all sorts of trouble, but they get away with it. But this was just great play from Amorim, and it was that lovely mix between the tactics and the personnel. Now, in the second half, of course, Liverpool made a lot of changes, but the general kind of defensive solidity needed to remain the same. One difference, I think, was that Isak was kind of replaced from a positional sense by Szoboszlai initially, and then Wirtz, and actually this became the two here that you were working with, as opposed to previously when Szoboszlai was here, Isak was kind of working those channels at times. So that created a bit more kind of connectivity, for want of a better word, the ability to kind of get through, but also players like Wirtz who could drop in and drive, bounce it and go, and then rotations between Gakpo and Ike, which probably led to the goal. Chiesa actually being out there as well, and just ultimately with Szoboszlai sort of stepping stepping in at times and Wirtz then moving up, just having a whole host of players high up the pitch. Frimpong as well came on, putting more crosses in and flooding the box. And, we can talk about tactics and make shit up, but I'm not going to do that. It's a simple thing where it was actually about kind of digging in there and hanging in there, and they had some chances, Liverpool for sure, but Man United showed real spirit. What did happen in terms of the game state and the change there was that they started to lose a lot more duels. And so obviously the goal comes from that when it comes to Liverpool in terms of winning the ball and building up that pressure. Liverpool got the goal, they were in the ascendancy. Something needed to change. They needed a hero. No, wait. They needed a Harry. I need a Harry! Now, before we talk about the goal, because there's something not underhand at play, but something that could have affected it for sure, and therefore would have been a draw instead of a win, let's have a look at this. This is every aerial duel won in the game. And this aerial duel here that he wins in the 82nd minute when the ball's bouncing about, a lot of talk about it being a bit of a basketball match, but of course Liverpool were going for it and they had so many players forward, as I've just illustrated. But Harry Maguire stepping up, putting his head where it hurts. And look, if you're going to do it, I think it's the right head to do it. But he goes and he wins it, gets absolutely clattered. He's on the floor for a bit. And then he gets up and then he trots forward and then he steps forward to become Harry the hero once more. And I'm delighted for him because he's been through a hell of a lot. And I think that the sort of the mental fortitude that he's shown throughout, I think this goal sums it up. His connection with Bruno Fernandes in terms of his need for those two to get them out of trouble a lot of time, that's a big part of this. Now, there's one thing that I've got to touch on, and I don't know if people have done this or not. The ref. The ref stopped Salah. I thought, was Salah not being kind of alert enough here, ready for it? Because Mbeumo obviously comes and gets a shot. But the ref is in his way. So if he was able to kind of go in a straight line, I think he could have affected it a lot more, maybe made the block himself, and of course the goal doesn't happen. But because the ref is there, he's kind of in his way, and that allows for that initial shot off. Look, he would have been a yard closer, Salah. He absolutely would have. Maybe makes the block, and it's a completely different story. But what's crucial here is Harry Maguire. He is the hero of the piece, and he stays alive. Look at the body language of every other player as the ball hits and comes back out. Absolute genius from Bruno Fernandes to put it straight in. He knows he wants to put it into that good area. He knows he's aiming for Harry Maguire. I feel like every time I watch Man United play, there's a close-up of him and then a close-up of Harry Maguire when the two are playing and it's a set piece. And they got their rewards for trying to find each other time and time and again. And Harry Maguire's been chucked up front and he's made huge differences. But you can see from his body language here, I'd say I would give it to Seshko as well. I think he's looking alive. But Cunha's kind of making his way back. The rest of them are kind of facing the wrong way. But Harry Maguire, to the rescue, scores the header, steps up. And that's what that second half was about for Man United. They did step up. Can they do it with this next run of games against teams that I believe are the actual pure stock of the Premier League now? You know, teams that are going to finish between 7th probably and 14th. You've got to go and be able to win those games. It's going to be a very different challenge because Liverpool were able to kind of own the centre of that midfield. And a team that sits off Man United, are they going to be able to break them down? That's going to be a very different challenge. But today, Amorim won it fair and square. Great tactical plan, completely worked and exploited Liverpool's biggest weakness. I've got a whole video on Liverpool on the A channel, my instant reaction. If you want to go and check that out, you can do so right this second.